Okay, here we go. We're continuing reading Space Skipper. We're up to chapter 4. Chapter 4, I think. Chapter 4. Enter the Grissoms. Half an hour later, Luke was still trying to make the Space Skipper work. He knew it was running. He could hear the engine humming. The little moulded seat vibrated gently against his back. There should be a throttle and a brake somewhere, but he couldn't find either of them. And how could he steer it? The inside of the Space Skipper was a very snug fit. There was hardly room for anything except for Luke. He tried to feel underneath the seat, but it went all the way to the floor. He ran his hands over the inside of the hatch. Apart from the latch, it was completely smooth.
Oh, no.
Luke began to feel angry. Prof had tricked him, and now he would never be allowed to practice in the gravity chute again. But what was the point in using the gravity chute anyway? He could never play 3D while Mayor Clickfitz owned the team. Sadly, he began to daydream about how he would play if he ever had the chance. He began to leap high, dive low. He would kick himself in the diagonal glide that Saber could never. Ah, yelled Luke. The Space Skipper had suddenly bounced and performed a diagonal glide across the room. It came to rest against one of the walls, then sat there humming quietly. Luke swallowed hard. What just happened? He asked aloud. No one answered. I must have done something, muttered Luke. He thought about what he'd done. He'd tried to find some controls, but nothing had happened until he started practicing 3D moves in his mind. Luke gripped the bar with sudden excitement. Carefully, he pictured himself performing a basic diagonal kickoff, leading with his left shoulder. The Space Skipper skimmed diagonally across the room. Okay, now an up and over, said Luke. He held his breath. Nothing happened. Up and over. Deliberately, Luke tucked his head forward and pushed his feet against the boot floor of the Space Skipper. Flip! The Space Skipper made a neat twisting roll in the air. Wow, it's controlled by his mind. All right, said Luke. He considered beeping Prof to boast that he had cracked the code, but after a moment he put his beeper away. Once Prof knew, he would make all kinds of rules about using the Space Skipper. Better have fun while he could. Luke looked around. The room he was in was not big enough to put the Space Skipper through its paces. How could he get out of this room? He considered the trapdoor. Would the Space Skipper fit through that? Closing his eyes, Luke imagined doing a vertical spear leap in 3D. The Space Skipper shot upwards through the trapdoor, nose first. Yay! Yelled Luke. He hopped the skipper carefully into the gravity chute and arrived safely in the half-empty room of the main workshop. He longed to beep Ellie, but caution won out. He would wait until he was an expert pilot before he gave her a demonstration. It took only a few more maneuvers to get the feel of flying the skipper. All Luke had to do was to pretend he was playing 3D, and the skipper would react just as if it were his body. He was about to beep for Ellie to come when the workshop door crept open and two boys snuck in. What is going on? Luke groaned as he recognised them. Naylor Grimson was 16 and his brother Maury a year older. Prof hated all the Grissoms, not because they were shipborn, but because they were thugs and thieves. Grandfather Gaffer Grissom was an inventor, like Prof, but his inventions were never used for anything good. Do something, Luke told himself, but what could he do? He wanted to fly the Space Skipper right over the Grissoms' heads and escape into the station, but Maury had closed the door behind them. Could he hop the skipper back into the gravity chute, or would moving it attract attention? His hand went to his beeper, but before he could call for help, Naylor grabbed his brother's arm and pointed straight at Luke. Maury backed against the door, and Luke was so scared he dropped the beeper. He fumbled for it. Before he could locate it, Naylor had reached the Space Skipper and rapped on the hatch. Get out of that, kid, he said to Luke. Luke shook his head. Have it your own way. Naylor unfolded something that looked like a black blanket and held it up. This is Gaffer's new invention, he said. It's called a blank out. One side is black and the other side makes things disappear. He laughed. Makes things dark too. You station-born don't like the dark, do you? Shut up, said Maury. Last chance, kid, said Naylor. Either you go quietly or it's lights out. Before Luke could move, the boy tossed the blank out over the skipper and everything went dark. Too late, said Naylor. Luke bit his lip, fighting down the panic. It's all right, he told himself. It isn't a power fail. Darkness on Nova generally meant the power had failed. It's just that blank out. I'm safe. They can't get me unless I unlock the hatch, Luke thought. Unfortunately, the Grissoms could get the skipper, and they carried it off with Luke right inside. Luke could hear muffled sounds, but he could see nothing. He was jolted about, and suddenly he seemed to be rushing upwards. Gravity chute, he thought, but gravity chutes don't make that whining noise. The only one thing on Nova made that kind of sound. That's when he stopped being frightened and became terrified instead. The Grissoms were using the cargo lift. That meant they were planning to take the space skipper and Luke right out of Space Station Nova. Oh no, into space. Chapter 5, Grissom Station. Like most of the station-born, Luke had never been outside Nova. Now he was going outside whether he wanted to or not. His heart felt as if it was playing a 3D inside his chest. He clenched his hands on the bar. Could he still escape? No. How could he make the space skipper do anything when he couldn't see? Ramming it against the cargo lift walls would be stupid. The whine stopped. Luke bit his tongue as the lift lurched to a stop. He heard the hissing creak of the airlock and then the clang as a magnetic claw attached to the space skipper's hull. What if the hatch came loose? The oxygen inside the skipper would bleed into space. Then he'd suffocate. Luke held his breath. He felt the skipper swing sideways, then fall suddenly as the magnetic field was cut. It landed with a jolt. Luke bit his tongue again. For a moment there was silence, then the throb of engines. Now Luke knew he was inside a cargo ship. He was no longer afraid of dying in the vacuum, but how long would the oxygen inside the space skipper last? Luke started breathing as shallowly as he could. The journey was a short one. Soon he heard the engine stop. There was another loud clang, another metal magnetic claw. The space skipper jolted, swung, and came to rest. Luke's eyes ached from trying to pierce the darkness. He felt panic building inside his skull. If only he had stayed in the lower basement. If only he had beeped for Prof or Ellie as soon as he discovered how to make the space skipper move. One or both of them might have come in time to help him stop the Grissoms. Prof will find me, he promised himself. But how? Prof might suspect the Grissoms of the thefts, but how would he find out where they had gone? Light flooded the space skipper as Naylor whisked away the blanket. He grinned into Luke's terrified face. Enjoy the dark, did you, station-born? Ha! Maury grunted. Shut up. What do we do with him now? Wondered Naylor. I want to try out our nice new toy. Gaffer will be pleased. Maury loomed over the skipper. Out! Luke shook his head. If you don't, said Maury, holding up a shiny tool, I'll cut you out with this buzz blade. You won't enjoy that. Luke believed him. He couldn't let the Grissoms cut up the space skipper. It was his only chance of escape. He felt for his beeper, but Naylor raised the buzz blade in a threatening gesture. Luke unclipped the hatch and scrambled out. Naylor propelled him across an untidy floor. What is this place? Asked Luke, stumbling. His eyes were watering from the sudden light, and he was shocked at the rubbish on the floor. Any station-born knew litter could be deadly if something went wrong with the gravity control. The air was stuffy too. This is Grissom Station, said Naylor proudly. Our very own invisible space station. Have a good look round, kid. It's the only place you'll be seeing until someone pays up big for your ransom. Luke took a deep breath. We can't be far from Nova. Prof will find you. That's where you're wrong, said Naylor. No one can see us while we're wrapped in blanket. Shut up, growled Maury, and climbed into the space skipper. The blank out, that's right. Naylor jiggled excitedly while his brother tried to close the hatch, but Maury was too tall. Naylor took his brother's place. How do you turn it on, kid? Luke shrugged. You can't, he lied. It isn't finished. He took a deep breath. Prof said I could sit in it while he went to report the theft. Naylor felt around the space skipper just as Luke had done. What if he found the beeper? In stories, kids like Luke regularly defeated space pirates, but this was real life. In real life, kids like Luke couldn't even get a place on a 3D team. Grissom Station had a fancy name, but it was really just a pile of junk divided into sections. Luke was supposed the Grissoms lived in one part and stored their loot in some of the others. He recognised a lot of the items from Prof's workshop, yet it was the corner of the room that attracted his attention. It looked empty, but Luke could not see the wall. Maybe it was more of the blank out. If so, what was hidden behind it? By now, Naylor was getting angry. He opened the hatch for the space skipper and jumped out, then grabbed Luke by the arm. "How does it work?" Luke thought fast. "It doesn't. I was just sitting in it. If it did work, why didn't I use it to fly away?" Maury jerked his head from his brother. "Let's go back to the cargo ship. We have 2 ransoms to organise now." "What about the kid?" Naylor wanted to know. "We can't just leave him loose in here. He might mess things up." Mess things up? Luke almost laughed. This was without doubt the messiest place he'd ever seen. It even smelled bad. He was willing to bet the Grissoms had never bothered to establish a proper green ox system. "Stuff him in the chute," said Maury. Naylor grabbed Luke and dragged him towards the strange blank corner of Grissom Station. It was more blank out. Naylor ripped it away to reveal a gravity chute. He opened the hatch and shoved Luke inside. Then, with a very nasty grin, he slammed the indicator to 0 gravity. "You station-born always get space sick," he said.